I was asked if I would answer questions, and I said I would, because actually there are a good many things that are in the news these days that I like to deal with, but I would prefer to deal with them usually on the basis of questions, because then what comes more spontaneously. Yes? No. Unfortunately, what happens to CBS when when they are engaged in this kind of activity and when the facts are established by a House committee? There is a report by the House committee, a highly critical report, I might say, on all three of these things, and these were bipartisan reports, too. But there is too little. FCC has a natural desire, and I happen to agree with this, not to want to get into the programming. I would think, though, that CBS would try to straighten a record and avoid the problem in the future. This is what I had reference to when I say you start with accurate facts. If you start with a baby that is not a victim of malnutrition and you try to palm this off, you haven't got very far to go except down. Yes. Yes. Let me tell you, I don't know what the Berkeley police petition is. I don't know. They should be permitted. You think they should be permitted? Well, I was throwing it back. Do you feel that there should be a right to promote drugs by who is engaging in this now besides the FCC? Yes, but I haven't seen enough. I am completely confident that the people who are on the FCC today, well, all right, people who are on the FCC today represent a broad enough cross-section of different views that each and every viewpoint on this subject will get across. And you see, I'm not concerned about specific rulings as long as we've got Nick Johnson and Birch sitting over there in that same commission. You will always have somebody with your point of view, I'm sure, and maybe not. Maybe you have one that's beyond some of those that I've mentioned. Anyway, I do not get concerned about that particular type of thing. I do get concerned about the kind of surveillance that there was by the defense establishment. And again, though, looking at it in perspective, as it started off, it was the proper thing to do in the aftermath of the assassinations, because this was a large group that could be used for the kind of surveillance. And if you hadn't done it, you would have been subject to criticism because you did not use your military people or anyone else. Now, granted, it got clear out of hand. I think it's a scandal how it got out of hand, but we're starting to correct it now. And why are we correcting it? We're correcting it because the Congress of the United States found out about some of this, and where the Army itself would not correct parts of it, the Congress has aired it, and it is being corrected. And this is part of our system, too.
I just assumed that Mr. Agnew would be, but I'm not, I don't have any inside track on that particular thing, and I think that the President of the United States is trying to keep that little thing a secret, even from Mr. Agnew, particularly from Mr. Agnew. Yes. Well, I think that the role was vital. There wasn't any question about it. Now, I might say, I'm not sure that was a good decision. And let me say, as I say this, I'm not sure it was a bad decision either. And I don't think there's anybody up there in the Congress on either side who is really too sure about this from that standpoint. Now, let me say, on the one side, I think that the administration used a lot of the phoniest arguments possible relative to this thing being a self-sustaining program, one that would pay off in the long run. I don't think they can say that at this stage. But by the same token, those who went off on the ecological kicks over on the other side were just as far off base. And I like Bill Proxmire. There are things where I think he does a good job. But in that particular instance, I think he received too much credit because of that cockeyed bit he pulled that last day on with regard to skin cancer. Now, maybe the SST will cause skin cancer too. I don't think he presented any kind of a case to support this, and I think that making the whole issue in that manner was a little melodramatic, and I think it probably would have lost without this. There were some other things that got involved in this, in that House vote particularly. You had such things as Congressman Shirley down here just said, I don't like the way the administration's doing a lot of things, and I'm just going to vote against this because I think we need most of that money out in Iowa for the farmers. Well, that's as good an argument as most of the others. And Joel Broyhill over in Virginia, he voted for him the last time, but this time Senator Spong, a Democrat from Virginia, had voted against the SST before. He didn't, there was no penalty for Spong in voting for against the SST. And in addition, the administration let a press release be handled through Senator Spong's office relative to some, well, it was just a routine little thing involving an airport down there in Virginia. Now, at that stage, Senator Broyhill says, well, I don't need them either. And he went off, he says, I'm sure there's some other place we can spend all that money. And he went off in that direction. Now, certainly, these are little aspects, but they demonstrate that there are many, many things that get into the change in the vote. And I might say that both Shirley and Broyhill, and there were a good many others, said they were not personally moved by all the ecological arguments against the SST. They just thought, well, to hell with the administration. There was a very devastating defeat for the administration because it did represent many, many facets of the problem that they're faced with right today. And I don't know whether they can get through a sufficient defense budget. Now, when I say this, I'm not for wasting money on defense. I'll tell you this, though. I'm not to the point where I think that we can trust the communist world. Maybe we can. I just haven't quite reached that point yet. And I think that we do need, in the meantime, just a little defense establishment so that they won't just come running over here. Yes. I'm familiar with Senator Ervin's committee and some of these things. This is the area, though, where we have to make
some judgments. On the one hand, we want the government to do all kinds of things and accumulate all kinds of facts for doing things for us. At the same time, we don't want them to have this where anybody can get a hold of it. Now, these two things are really inconsistent, and a lot of this gets into a matter of semantics. Surveillance. I've got you under surveillance. The police have someone under surveillance out here who looks like he might be breaking into cars. Now, there's some point here that means that's reasonable, and there's a point that's unreasonable. In the eavesdropping field is the one area where you can draw some of these lines pretty well. Eavesdropping is something that is carried on now under court order. In the organized crime section, they have had something roughly in the neighborhood of 300 eavesdropping operations in the last year and a half. They are able now to put the finger on the key figures in organized crime. They have been able to stop some burglaries before they happen, stop some bank robberies before they happen, and a few other things. Now, there is always a danger on eavesdropping, and there always will be. But if it's carried on under a court order, the law enforcement officer must get the authority of the Attorney General and must make a public record of this, whether it's in Kansas City to get some mafia chief or in Chicago or wherever it may be. We have the assurance then that some committee of Congress can get into this later, and if they're abusing it, jump all over them, criticize them. If Senator Ervin finds out that there is an abuse, I have no doubt Senator Ervin will speak out. And we're never going to get to that point in society where we have just that perfect balance. And we're always going to be tugging back and forth. And we're always going to have to take a look at the specific facts in a specific case to determine, well, as to whether you struck somebody else first or whether he provoked you. That's always going to be the kind of close question. Yes? Well, I laid out a few of those here a little earlier. On the Cali trial, I really have to say that I feel sorry for Cali. I wonder whether this is the right kind of a judgment. I hope that it's a life term rather than taking his life. I can feel sorry for him, not because I excuse him, because he was absolutely wrong in what he did, but only because this is a young man who was sent to war, and I don't know what I might have done if I were put up there under those circumstances where you didn't know who the people were, where you didn't know where you were going to be that night, where you didn't know how precarious your situation was going to be. Now, there's another area, though, where I get just damned mad, and that's these characters who go out there and loot these service clubs and post exchanges and run about a dozen rackets off of each one of them, fill their own pockets out of a war. Because there isn't any excuse for that. And unfortunately, it was necessary to keep the committees of Congress right on top of these matters so that you could prove who the generals were who were involved in the cover-up. What else was it? Oh, it was something about oh, well, let me say that it was not I think it's been pretty well covered. I mean, this is the kind of thing that once it reaches that particular level, I see no problem, because you will get plenty of people, whether it would be of a liberal viewpoint or a conservative viewpoint or even just a middle-of-the-road viewpoint, who would get into these things and would cover them, and all of those views deserve to be heard, and perhaps they add something else to it. The things that concern me in covering the Pentagon are the contracts, and I frequently have made mention of the TFX contract, which is about a $5-6 billion contract, and the television and the newspapers would pay no attention to this from 1963 until about the last 2 or 3 years, simply because Robert McNamara, who happened to be one of those kind of images that they like to cater to, was the guy responsible for it. Of course, I think he was a disaster in the way he ran the Pentagon, and I think if there's anybody to blame for the Vietnam War, it's Robert S. McNamara. Yes. Yes. Yeah, he has communications problems there, and I'm not that high on the way we communicated as an administration, and that was on the inside. And on the outside, I even have less regard for the way the administration has handled its problems. I mean, it can't escape by simply saying it's all television's fault. There are a lot of areas here where the administration is superficial. And why are they superficial? Well, like Johnson, like Kennedy, because of television. Let me tell you, I think that the major problem of the last 20 years has been television, because nobody has to read. You get that little old light zeroing in on the fella, and he can oversimplify it, cut it, clip it. And what this has done to our politicians, it doesn't make any difference whether it's been Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, or Nixon. They have all changed their patterns to meet that media. And I don't think it's good, because it gives us this oversimplified answer to essentially everything. And when you see the people on Meet the Press or Face the Nation, you know that there are certain types of questions that they have been involved in answering for some period of time that do not answer the question, but are a cute way of dodging it. I don't think that this should be permitted. I think that we should have people reading more and understanding more, and in this area, that is the only safeguard that our American democracy has. This country has probably the highest level of education any place in the world, but I hate to think what can happen another 10, 12 years of television where people get weaned away from a study of depth on any subject. Yes. Yes. No. And one of the things, the Washington Post, that very seldom lines up with Mr. Agnew, lined up with him with regard to one aspect of this. One of the criticisms was the way the comments of Dan Hinken, the Pentagon, and Eddie Hebert and 4 or 5 others were edited. The kind of question that was being asked and the response. Well, the Post went through this morning in an editorial and pointed out that the questions that were asked had no relationship to the kind of answers and were just juxtaposed for purposes of making somebody look a little bit stupid. And the fact of the matter is, when you played back the answer to the actual question, it was a reasonable answer. See, I believe in very aggressive reporting. And you talk with any of my friends in Washington, you will know this. But I also believe in trying to get the facts straight. And I also believe that if you've got a fellow and he's off base, you don't have to take any advantage of him. If he's wrong, see, I don't like to deal with some of the kind of people that's kind of grays. Jimmy Hoffa, I know. Bobby Baker, I know. Robert McNamara, I know. I can go right down the line on every one of these with a good documentation. I've written a few books on the subject. That way you don't get into this kind of this gray area. I think that every person in public life is entitled to his say, his side. But I think that we should not edit in a way where he doesn't even know that he's been edited. And that's one of the tricks of the networks. They come out and they interview you. A half hour, an hour, or more. And what do they get on the television tube? 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And that's just the time that you were probably blowing your nose. No, but in fact, this is essentially, you can go through a very careful discussion, in depth. U.S. News and World Reports does the kind of a job, and I don't know how many of you read U.S. News and World Reports, but this is the kind, they have a long interview. Sometimes it's a little boring, but I'll tell you this, you don't have anything out of context, and you know that the fellow who sat down there to be interviewed by that board had an opportunity to go through that thing and say, yes, this is what I meant. All of us can be caught off base once in a while. Something slips out. What we want to know is, what did the man say in context? Did he really mean it? Is he wrong? Does he exhibit an attitude that we might disagree with? Yes. Well, there once in a while that we had a difference of opinion. Yes. Well, no, I think that by and large, the people who are in government are honest. And this means in the Senate and in the House and in the government agencies. But the problem is simply this. If they get by with, if you've got some scoundrel and he gets by with something, then you have a whole lot of other little scoundrels that rise up around there and say, see, he's getting by with it, let's us do it. And pretty soon you get a corrupting influence, and this is what you've had in the OEO. I mean, of course, I guess you couldn't expect any more. This is just an appropriation of money to do good for people. And it didn't say how you do the good, and you let people just devise their own ways. You cannot run that kind of programs of a large size. Did that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Well, I'll tell you how it did. Because the Ku Klux Klan, the Mafia, and the Black Panthers on performance deserve to be in essentially the same category. Now, when I say that, let me say this. That does not indict all Black Panther members, all Ku Klux Klan members, or all Mafia members. There happen to be a few people in all these organizations that are going along because they think it probably heads in the right direction some way and they're unaware. Let me tell you though, did you see the New Yorker magazine here of just about a month ago? The Black Panthers Council had said that there was this war on the Black Panthers by police. He said initially that there were 28 Black Panthers who were killed. Well, they got that thing winnowed down later. It was maybe 20. Well, no, it wasn't. It was 15. Well, no, not that, because the fact of the matter is Black Panthers have been killing Black Panthers. And by the time you got through this, you had only it was 2 or 3 cases where there was any possibility that the police were engaged in any kind of an offensive against the Black Panthers. But let me tell you about that, too. That proved 2 basic things. One was the incompetence of the press in following through. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the CBS, NBC, you name it. I wouldn't be surprised with the Des Moines Register. Because they got wire services, but they didn't go back to check to see who were the 28 that were named. Now, the Wall Street Journal did. And subsequently then, you had this fellow who did this article for the New Yorker magazine who went through this. And if you haven't read it, I would advise you to read it because it shows the importance of the detail. It shows one of the greatest weaknesses of the press. And this is an area where people do not intend to mislead. They pick up an old clipping, and the old clipping says 28 or 20 or whatever it is. And they do not go back and check anew to make sure that all of these people were killed under circumstances that support the point that was made by the council. Yes. Well, number one, there are circumstances where I don't think one should give that information simply because it's obtained in a confidential manner. But I do not approve of enactment of shield laws. That's the laws that would prevent the court from forcing you to tell the source of a story. Because if you look at that in detail, and I might say I was chairman of the Freedom of Information Committee for Sigma Delta Chi for about a dozen years or more. And I always opposed this, and I might say we never did come around to any conclusion. I don't know what they're doing right now, but the question dealt with the shield laws and the reporters, necessity of the reporter going before a court and relating the source of his story. Say, I'm opposed to the shield law idea because the shield law provides what is a legitimate reporter. Now, is it a gambling sheet? What is it? Well, we had a hard enough time. I sat on the board of governors of the National Press Club trying to determine what was and was not a legitimate newspaper. And you'll find, as you get into this subject a little more deeply, that represents a real problem. But in addition, even among those reporters who are assigned to legitimate newspapers, you will find a lot of scoundrels. And I don't know as I want them in a position to be able to refuse to give testimony before a grand jury. I think this has to be judged on the basis of, is the information available from any other source? Now, if it is, then the reporter should not necessarily have to give it. Then you come to the next point. Did the reporter take that information on a pledge that it would remain confidential? Let me tell you, I've been in this business now for about 30 years, and I've been an investigator.
And I've been in the investigative aspect of it for most of that period of time.
And I can tell you that most of the people don't need this. Most of the information on the big stories doesn't come to you in this fashion. And it's only in a limited area if it ever does. And I just say it's not needed. There are some people who, they spent 6 weeks or 6 months maybe as an investigative reporter, and they find it would be very convenient if they could talk to people and that they wouldn't be forced to testify. Well, it would be convenient, but would it be in the public interest? Well, I just doubt it myself. I think there are too many other ways that you handle this. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you've got one right here. One more. Yeah. Well, we of the Washington Bureau do not put the captions on the pictures. Basically, I think that the story of the series was a darn good balanced job, because where in one of the series it would lean this way, there would be another one that would demonstrate somewhat the balance and at least the questions raised. I mean, this is something we could argue about for a long period of time. I do think, though, that basically this was a very good job, unemotional, and I think that whatever they did on the headlines and the captions, somebody else will have to take responsibility for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mollenhoff. I have 2 announcements. First, I'd like to invite everybody to the reception at the Alpha Gamma Rho House. It's right across from Sorority Circle on the corner of Gray and Sunset Avenue. So I'd like everybody to come over there. Also, I have an announcement for Mrs. Marietta Adams. She could please report to the box office right after the convocation. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and we hope to see you tomorrow night also. Thank you very much.